And I guess we are live. So, hi everyone, happy Thursday, and welcome to our No Code Ops Community Live show. We're here after a very long series of events on APIs, which has been absolutely fantastic. You know, the engagement that we've noticed in the community and the interest from all the audience just around our community and this topic was absolutely incredible. And so we're very happy to also come to the end of this journey. So far, we've been exploring what APIs are, how to use them, how to make your own. And today, in particular, here with Jason Green, CEO at Ample Cloud, we will be exploring, what an API will look like in the future. Do they have a future? And so, Jason, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself and tell us a bit of, how you ended up in the no-code space and what took you here today, and then we can dive into your presentation about the future of APIs.
Well, it's great to be here with everybody. Claudia, I know we've been trying to connect and we've crossed paths and walked past each other and been in the same room, but it's good to finally be here with everybody. And we're just really excited about APIs, which is the nerdiest thing on earth, but we are very excited about the future of APIs. And, it's been a long journey to get here. And I think I'll hop right into kind of how I got to be in this room right now. And I think it's an interesting story that a lot of you can probably relate to. And then we'll talk into the future and the past and the present of APIs. So I guess I'll go ahead and share my screen.
Yeah, let me just put it on there. There you go.
All right. So as we know, topic of conversation is the future of APIs, but I wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction. So, as Claudia said, I'm Jason Green. I'm CEO of Ample Cloud. We'll get into what Ample Cloud does a bit later, but I wanted everyone here to know how I got here. And I took my first steps into the technology world actually on accident. I would imagine some of you have a similar story. Um, I was starting a print digital design agency. I had a lot of very large customers, mostly in the liquor industry, doing print digital posters and whatever. Needed to create a website that matched the level of professionalism of my designs. Right. So this was in 2017, and Squarespace was kind of out there, and Wix, and I think Adobe had something at the time, and I really went through all these different options, and I started to say, like, okay, well, these are great, but these are for developers, or they're very basic and they're not good enough for what I need. Where it's web design, where are the design tools, right? So I did one last ditch search and happened to stumble upon this new platform called Webflow. And I pretty much knew immediately that this was the future, right? These types of tools, because I said, this allows me, who is I'm a go getter, I'm, willing to learn about these things in depth, to really start to provide tools that were professional level and provide projects for my customers that were professional level. So I immediately went from launching a print digital agency that got scrapped, and I started a website agency. So on the surface, when you dive into these tools for the first time, it seems like the possibilities are endless, right? And they kind of are, but they kind of aren't. I'm sure anyone that's familiar with no-code platforms, or Webflow in particular, there are things that you can't necessarily do, or there are limits that seem arbitrary, or hey, why is 100 in a CMS list the limit, or why can you only put 10 lists on a page, or those sorts of
Mm-hmm.
things. I came to find out that those were put there for a reason, right? And these were experts that built this platform, so they knew where to set the limits at to maintain flexibility. So I became very drawn to, as I was learning Webflow, I became very drawn to this concept of the CMS, right? Because not only could you build these, custom databases, which I didn't even really understand at the time. I just was like, oh, it's an image field and a text field, and this is great. But it allowed me to create a large volume of templatized pages, even though I was doing it manually, right? So I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I love this. It fit my brain for some reason. So this led me to begin experimenting heavily with use cases that involve third-party platforms, where I was like, oh, well, what are some things that you could put in this CMS collection to kind of goof around with? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so my background originally, before I got into technology and into design, was I spent 12 years in the music industry. I worked with a lot of large artists and,
I can
friends.
see that.
Yeah, friends that are in very well-known bands that I'm sure a lot of you have seen on stage and on TV. And, I also had a lot of friends in the ticketing industry, and Eventbrite has a large office here in Nashville, Tennessee, where we're based out of. So I somehow convinced my buddies who, don't know anything about this stuff. I said, "Hey, I'm gonna build this site for you and just take a look at it." So I went and built an Eventbrite based Webflow site that mirrored our Bridgestone Arena site, and it had a bunch of dummy data, and you could buy fake tickets, right? And this started passing around internally at Eventbrite, and that ultimately led to me building sites for all of their high profile customers all around the world. So Marvel, Miss Universe, Vice Media, UFC, you name it, every time zone. It was gangbusters. It was awesome. But it was a lot of work. And Claudia, I think I've mentioned this to you before. It started to really like wear on my mental health because it was so much work and it was high pressure and it was
Mm-hmm.
manual data entry and it was manual data updates of thousands and thousands of items that these people needed in these sites. Um, it it started to dawn on me that it was like, well, there's almost an unlimited supply of people or demand of people that want this type of thing, but it's they all want the same thing. They just want it to be on brand, right? So Marvel wanted their thing to look like Marvel, and Miss Universe wanted their thing to look like Miss Universe, but it was just an events page, right? So the manual data entry, it was just too much to keep up with. And what it turned into for me was I would say, and looking back on it, an unhealthy obsession with APIs, right? Because I could see the value, like, because people were paying me large amounts of money to do it manually. So I was like, oh, if I could just automate this, like, I'm rich, great, whatever. So, but also the technical, problem solver in me just wouldn't let it go. So I became obsessed with, all right, I can see the data is here and I can read the documentation and I can see how this thing works over here and I can see the documentation. Now, how do I get those things to talk to each other? And I was like, I just want my events to show up on my website. Like, that was just the overarching thing that I've said a million times in my head. And to me, it seems like it should be that easy. I tried every existing platform that I could, or that I could afford at the time. So the Zapiers, the Makes, whatever was out there, nothing really came close to the robustness that I needed for this particular task, right? It was a different type of operation. It's a CRUD
Mm-hmm.
operation. And as a Webflow user, I was like, well, it doesn't do me any good as a user if the data doesn't import. I need to be able to import data. And most zaps or whatever that you run, unless you're pretty technical, importing a large amount of data is really hard to kind of do. So, anyways, from there, I spent about $40,000 of my own money trying to build a very basic reusable integration, and it never moved a thing. It fell dead, right? But the obsession was still there, day and night, day and night, day and night, thousands of hours from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep, right? How do you make it work? What would you build? What are the real limits of these things? And this gets to why we're here today, which is, you know, seeing into the future. Once you've dug so far into something, you you start to understand them in a different way. Even if you don't necessarily know the technical pieces of it, you can see where it fits into the universe and how people are really using it in their businesses. And what I want to share with everyone today, so that hopefully you don't have to have this obsession, is what I've learned about the past, present, and future of APIs based on almost 5 years of obsession and building a brand new iPaaS platform from the ground up, built specifically to go further than what exists. So if you've been following the No Code Ops API series, you'll be familiar with a lot of the origins and terminology, but yeah, there were some really great speakers that talked about documentation and
Hmm.
some of the underlying things like Postman and Xano for databases and all these really great technologies. And really how I think about APIs is they were created, especially the modern APIs, were created as a way for one software to access data from another software. It's very simple, right? The concept. And once you kind of understand that principle, that's where the complexity starts because all of these systems are different. I think there was originally, I think it's the thing with a lot of technology, right? Where there's some altruistic thing that people say like an API, it works like this, and this is the documentation, and the documentation is the documentation. But really, what you start to find out is as you're um, building, and this was more of like the past part of APIs, right? So in the past, API integrations, which are these more robust connections that I'm speaking to, were almost entirely, and I guess even automations at this point in the past, were almost entirely exclusive to large organizations. These are the Coca-Colas, the IBMs, the NASAs, the governments, these big billion-dollar companies, because at that point it was just very hard to build and required a large amount of resource, and the compute wasn't powerful enough that or accessible enough to the everyday person. And they also required constant maintenance, which is still sort of a thing, and we'll get to that later. But big businesses know this, and this is why how they become big businesses and why they dominate every industry is integrated systems and software connectivity provide exponential value. It's just like
Hmm.
full stop. Businesses that can access these tools, they dominate the spaces they're in because it provides such value, to the scalability of their organizations that it's hard to compete, right?
Yeah, if you think about it, it's a little bit like what you needed back then when you first started. You were saying you have an unlimited pool of clients that you can't possibly satisfy all at once, and big companies are using that to scale up their businesses because they're providing that solution that can satisfy thousands and thousands of people. So.
Yeah, and I think I accidentally stumbled into like the first wave of, you know, we talk about this a lot at our company, which is, yeah, we're technology, but we also understand businesses, right? So there's this whole new, in the present, which is great timing here. There's a whole new wave of thinking at organizations, at these large organizations, right? Because now there are internal teams inside of these organizations that have a budget, and they need to use some of these integrations that, as we just said, are really hard to stand up and they're expensive and yada yada. They need these integrations, but they're not going to get the resource to do it. So what do? A lot of times they're hacking things together, or they're just falling very short, right? So what the present looks like, and this is probably what most of us are dealing with now, right? So as more and more businesses began to understand the value of integrations, platforms started to emerge to help. So that's the automation platforms that we're all familiar with now. Zapier, Workato, Make, and similar automation platforms that allowed for what we call, trigger based automations, which is if this, then that. So it's really just one thing happens, it triggers another thing, right? So for the first time, businesses of all sizes were able to automate simple, repetitive tasks, right? These were kind of the annoying things that you had to do every once in a while. And if you didn't have to do them, it was great, right? And then there were, of course, people that got very creative with them and started to stand up some interesting automations. But there's still a technical element to choosing modules in these platforms. Which modules do I need? Troubleshooting, like, can I even troubleshoot this if it's broken? Probably not. Maintenance, if it breaks, who's going to fix it? Because those platforms are a little bit gray on purpose about who owns the maintenance, right? So scalability becomes prohibitive, and or these things fall apart when you get into moderately complex use cases because there's so many points of failure, right? So that's kind of where we're at now. Also, where we're at now is SaaS platforms. This would be the Webflows and the MailChimps and Eventbrites and Greenhouse and all these SaaS platforms that are all over the world. They recognized a need to integrate more tightly with their what they would call complementary platforms, right? So each one of these SaaS providers may have 4 or 5 things that they go, oh, we really need to integrate with them. So we're going to build it ourselves, right? And we're going to do it right, which is great when they first came up with that idea. But I'm sure all of you now, you see when you go to buy a new software, it's like, the platform will list, hey, we built 100 integrations in house, right? Like HubSpot has like 100 integrations that they've built. So they have to have an entire portion of their business that is just integrations, right? So they can't spend that resource on making HubSpot better. They have to make it an integration.
Mm-hmm.
So it sucks a lot of resource. These are generally free integrations. They're not always maintained well. And if you still to this day, if you want a robust and stable integration that's going to do a high value business operation, it's a custom build, right? And those can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. It can take months or years to complete. And, these integrations, they still have a high value return to the business, but they require engineers to stand them up. And, it's a very, very finite resource. So, it's just there's been a lot of first steps that have happened, I think, in what's out there right now. And I think we're like right at the precipice of like the future of integrations. And it's really exciting to be, at least standing on that doorstep, with this community, because I think this is the community and these, operators who are knowledge workers and are technically minded, but not engineers, are going to
Mm-hmm.
thrive like you can't even believe in the future. It's really exciting. Um,
It's a good time to be alive. That's one of the things that I've seen, most written everywhere, and it's true. And especially for, inquisitive minds, like, that are, it's so specific to many indie makers, no code creators. We all have thousands of ideas every day. We all want to work on something, get super nerdy about a specific topic, and then we want to expand that knowledge and take it to the next level. And so, yeah,
yeah.
this is great.
Yeah. So I'll take that as we're going into the future. So here's, and it's the future, so who knows? But after years of research and analysis, we've made several predictions on the future of APIs. And this is based on, you know, our knowledge, our direct interaction with large customers, our, seeing industry leaders in the space, and kind of where I think everything is headed, right? Is SaaS, these SaaS platforms that are out there, the MailChimps, the whatever, the new ones that come up will be hyper vertical, where they do one very specific task in extreme detail, right? Which is great because you're getting like a very robust, you know, email thing and a very, very robust events thing and so on and so forth. And you've got these very, very powerful, but very narrow tools, right? So what that means is, you know, as this becomes more and more true, these app marketplaces that I just talked about, which are everywhere, these marketplaces, they made sense to build at a time when you needed to provide 8 or 10 integrations, but many of them swelled to over 100 integrations. It's kind of crazy. And we've already begun to see, just in our research, that there are these zombie integrations in the market. And we're starting to hear this term on calls with VCs and with, you know, with integrations that we're standing up for our enterprise customers, where, these free app marketplaces, the teams may have been let go that run these things, right? And there's 100 integrations, and when one of them breaks, when there's a breaking change in the API, it never comes back on. It's just dead, right? And then it sits there and it's useless. So we're very, very bullish on ecosystems, right? So what we think the future is going to be is ecosystems. I think Webflow took a pretty hard stance with their approach to integrations, in that they decided as a company that they were not going to provide integrations. It's, they don't have, there's no Webflow integrations, right? There's a couple that I think they tried as an experiment, but what they said is we're gonna say, instead of building 100, or 5 years from now, it may have to be 500 integrations into our platform. We're going to say, we're going to make our API rock solid. We're going to make it world class, and we're going to provide tools for developers to come in, consume this API, people that know what they're doing, that we can approve, that come in and they build solutions based on their expert knowledge, right? And everyone benefits from that, because, you know, everyone is going to get to use these more purpose-built integrations in the future, versus these systems that present you with thousands of options and pages of documentation. It's like, these two platforms, if they are, if there's two platforms on either side of any equation, there's a pretty narrow use case in between. So what you want to do is present a very narrow solution, right? And I think that's what you're going to see, is very focused integration solutions that are much faster to stand up, that are just infinitely more robust, and they provide business value to everyone in the chain, which is, that's where it gets interesting to me as a former, agency owner. And Claudia, we were talking about this before we hopped on here, is, when you're building in these systems that aren't so stable, I know as when I was running my agency, it gave me a lot of stress. And I was, I could only manage, 5 or 6 of these sites at a time, with all of the, manual updates I had to go back and do. And like, it never allowed me to get far enough to hire people. And then it was just like a stress, and it was just stressful.
Nobody wanted to get that wake up call at 3 a.m. saying that, one of your automations wasn't working. So
Yeah, and I had sites in Australia, Abu Dhabi, London, Amsterdam, San Francisco, and New York, all live at the same time, and I was a one-man show. So there was like a 2-hour window for like 4 or 5 months where I got to sleep. And I think it's a quality of life thing, right? Because APIs moving forward, they're going to be more robust, and it's going to allow you to access these better tools that are more specific for your end user. That means your customer that's using these things. And then you're going to be able to make them talk to each other in like almost like a hive mind sort of capacity, which is really, really interesting. So instead of one software that does 12 things, you can combine 12 softwares to make them do one thing.
yeah, they're
Which is,
called the API ecosystem, aren't they? I've noticed like it's a new trend in, at least in 2023. And I don't know about our audience here, but before I started hosting these events on APIs, I knew what they were, but I've never seen them. Now that we've been doing these events, literally every single website that I visit, whether it's a tool or whatever, I can see them. I can see API, or I notice them at least. And so I don't know if that's companies realizing, the importance, and more users making the most out of them, or starting to utilizing them at least. But I've noticed like more APIs in various websites, or at least in the no-code tools that we use. There's always an option that says, here's the API that you can use. And that's really great.
yeah, I was the same way when I started with Webflow. I was like, ooh, an API. And then I was like, you should have seen me when I was trying to build that one-off custom integration. I had a developer and I was trying to tell them what to do. And I'm like, I think we need a webhook. I don't know, like an API. Do we need the API and they're like, it's two different things. And I was like, okay, and this was 5 years ago or whatever. And didn't really even know where to point people to. But to the second part there, how those came to exist, it's really interesting when you think about it, is prior to all of these open APIs being everywhere, what happened in software was, I don't know if you remember this, or if anybody in the stream remembers this, but there was this race for like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years, where platforms were trying to win customers, and they were like adding all these features all the time, and they're adding all these features, and it became this like feature race, right? And I think eventually what they all sort of decided was, we can't build every feature for everyone because we can't maintain them all. So what we're going to start doing is saying, here's an open API. If the feature doesn't exist, go build it yourself, right? And that's how all these things started to pop up. And I think what they found out there, especially as they started to pull back a lot of those features, was, hey, there's like 20,000 people using this API. So every time we change something, we've got to tell 20,000 people, and then they've got to go fix it. And then we have 20,000 emails, and like, all of these domino effects that happen, which is where I think we're at in the future, is a pullback from the fully open API, which I think will still exist, but I think it will be primarily consumed by companies like us, who are experts, who are building these systems that understand the technical problem they're solving. And then if there's a breaking change, we fix it one time. It's a 2 to 3 minute, thing. Usually it's some little thing that can break something. We deploy it, and then everyone's back up and running. It's very similar to the cloud. We're called Ample Cloud. It's very similar to how cloud infrastructure works. Once every year, everybody gets 45 minutes off from work because AWS is down. or Slack is down, and that's the price you pay. Is like, you might lose an hour, but you're getting so much more value in return that it's just accepted. Which is really interesting. But let me see, there's a couple more things here. Kind of talked into that already. So I think a big
Oh yes, I
what
was
about
hoping you were going to talk about this because I'm sure we had a lot of questions in the forum about AI. I mean, it's a must have.
Yeah, so it's interesting because APIs, although they're a technical thing, they're a part of, if you really take a step back, they're a part of business, right? And everyone's using them to run some business operation. And these things get funded in cycles. And as we saw with crypto, there's a mania that happens, and everything kind of goes up and then it goes down, right? So I think what's going to happen with AI, and this is kind of what we're banking on with our company, or at least preparing for it, right? I really think it's going to be 3 to 4 years before AI will become, I would say, mature enough to really start using in daily life, right? And these are why I say this is because what we're going to run into, it's a kind of a greenfield space for the world, right? So there are no laws, there are no privacy laws, there are no copyright laws. There's going to be a ton of courts, fights, lawsuits, laws passed. Google's going to have to figure out how they're going to handle SEO moving forward.
Yeah.
Is Google not even going to be is that not going to be a thing? Is Bing going to take over? Like, who knows? So there's a lot of unknown with AI. And I think what we will see is there's going to be a swell of startups. We're already seeing it. There's going to be 100,000 startups that come out that do some little thing with AI. And what they do is they actually consume ChatGPT or whatever through an API, and they're built on top of it so that you can use it, right? So what happens from there, at least my guesstimation would be, so the underlying infrastructure, ChatGPT or whatever, they're going to suck up all these pennies and they're going to become huge, right? And it's going to be like cloud. There's going to be 3 or 4 or 5 of these main players, and a lot of those startups, what those 3 or 4 or 5 main players will do, they'll start to increase the price of that infrastructure. And then those companies that are building on it, the margins will become so small that they die. And then what's going to happen?
That's a very bleak future, everyone.
No, it's great. This is the great thing for all of us is, we'll get to use those tools while they're there. But the underlying 3 to 4 competitors, guess what they're going to do? When all that stuff, the dust is settled and those people have gone away, they're not going to have people sucking up those pennies or giving them those pennies anymore. So they're going to start to drive the cost down significantly. and they're going to do things like offering credits, like 50,000 credits to come in and use these things. It's going to be very cheap to consume. And guess what? All of these things are API as a service. So they're made to be used as an API. So you don't really need those little softwares that exist on the top if you can go directly to the source, right? So what we're saying is not only in the future, and this is long tail 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, what you'll be able to do in a platform like ours is say, hey, I want to connect Eventbrite to Webflow, or Webflow to MailChimp or whatever, but I also want it to run through ChatGPT in the middle, run some process, and then do something. And you can start to chain these things together to build that hive mind sort of a process where it really becomes hard to wrap your head around how much value is locked up in that type of a process. Like it's an exponential value curve for everyone that can use it. And for us in the no code community, since the APIs are becoming more and more accessible and the tools are getting easier to use, it's going to be amazing, because it's going to be the first time in history that everyone is on a level playing field with all of these, technologies. It's really, really exciting.
That was one of the questions that we had in the form from Gary from the community. Will API become more accessible now that you're mentioning it? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll give you a little bit of a glimpse into what we're doing at Ample Cloud to make these things more accessible. I know we're kind of like going on and on here a little bit, but the underlying concept here is that these things are becoming more accessible and they're becoming more valuable as well. So there's a double um, advantage to these things. So I'll give you a little bit of a walkthrough of what we're doing. So this is the first time anybody's seen this, by the way. Let me change my
Sneak peek.
Yeah, let me share different tab here. Can I share QuickTime? Oh, here it is. All right.
All right, let me see if I can put that on the stream. That's it.
All right. So what we have here is an empty CMS in Webflow, and the goal is to get a bunch of existing Eventbrite events into the CMS with all of the data lined up, and then import that data and then keep it up to date over time. So what we're doing in our system that's a lot different is we're actually when you create a source, in this case, we're creating an Eventbrite source, and you authorize it. So we're going through the authorization process. We're actually importing all of the data from that account when it becomes connected, right? So we're importing the events, the organizations, and the organizer profiles. Organizations and organizer profiles are a tagging system that exists within Eventbrite. And then when you're choosing your destination, in this case, we're choosing Webflow. When you connect the destination, you are actually it's actually presenting you with unique UI based on the source, right? So it knows that it's connected to Eventbrite. So it's presenting you with the Eventbrite selections and then a specific field map and set of field maps for that particular destination. So you don't have to actually go read any documentation. You don't have to go read any sort of you don't have to go and try and read about what are these modules or whatever. All of those processes that need. I'll pause it real quick. Wow, when we get to this next. So these are the fields, and then if you're adding the Webflow destination side, so here's where it gets really interesting for us, right? So instead of being presented with a payload in like a Zapier where you could see, hey, there's 800 different options in here, right? We know as a platform that since you're sending events data to Webflow, there's only like 30 fields that you would ever care about in this API. And what we've actually done is we've gone through and converted all of this stuff. When you saw it import the data, we've actually cleaned all of the data on the way in. So it's all formatted in a universal way. So you never have to worry about transforming any data or formatting it properly for the destination. Or, like you can see here at the bottom, there's a full description, which is a rich text field. And anybody that's tried to work with rich text fields knows that it's really tricky, right, to get them formatted properly. So what we do is, and in Eventbrite, nobody even knows this, but it's in another section of the API, the full description. It's not in the event stuff. So we have to make a secondary call to go and get some of these things. And there's all of this complexity happening in the background. But all you need to know is I'm selecting the full description, and then you can kind of move on with your life, right? Because it's all been handled. And this is just the approach that we take to everything that we build, where we're making the data consumable in our system. And then once you've got, hey, I need to set up, is it a free event? I want the full description. I want the event image. Is it a public event? Kind of like skip through this here a little bit. So once you have selected the fields that you want, you switch over into Webflow. I missed the part where you hit the connect button, but it's pulling all of the events in. And then it's established a connection so that in Eventbrite, as you change information, it passes through to the website and you don't have to do anything, right? So say you tag something to the wrong category, it's going to actually move it to the other category. And, it's really allowing people to do, we have enterprise customers that are doing, thousands and thousands of items that are in sync. And we hear from them, once a quarter, twice a quarter, and they never even have to go into the website to do any of this stuff. And that's really, to me, that's the end goal, is to make these things stable so that when you connect them, they run and you move on with your life. And even for us building them, we were very intentional about how we built the platform. So, because we don't want to have to, have so much maintenance that it becomes impossible, right? So we had to be very smart about how we built our maintenance layers in. And then also, what platforms do we build for? And Webflow is a no-brainer because it's just such an amazing platform.
Awesome. And that's just really inspiring. I keep thinking of you, when you started and you had that issue, you knew you had potential, you knew the tools had potential, but just you were one step away from really finding this massive solution, which is now the product that you're building. And it's very inspiring. I hope to everyone listening here today, once you, as no coders, like we, as I was saying earlier, like we have so many ideas and we need to make sure that we grasp that knowledge. Sometimes it's just one little step that allows you to open up so many more opportunities. And so for us, APIs obviously have been a fantastic topic because of that, is empowering so many people to reach that further step. And so I see that in your product as well. There's a question in the chat. How about Framer? I feel this may be the next best website.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's the hard thing, right? Claudia, you've pointed this out, and I kind of stepped on this thing years ago too. It's like, wow, APIs are everywhere, which means there's basically an unlimited number of platforms that you could potentially build for, right? So I think we had to kind of make a decision, at least for this stage of our business, we're still a very small team, to kind of pick a horse and put our money down, right? Where we said, I think Webflow is a very, very interesting tool. They're starting to go up market, right? Where they're getting more and more enterprise functionality and users, right? And that means that all of the Webflow community is going to need more upmarket integration solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, we plan to release integrations like this for, Greenhouse and Lever and Workday and Vimeo Enterprise and YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all of these things that do the same sort of like import and sync in a very specific use case manner. And I just think it's going to open up a lot of revenue possibility for freelancers and entrepreneurs, and it's going to allow people that are on the internal teams of these companies to you know, they're going to be the rock stars at their companies. It's I don't know if anybody watched the Super Bowl, but the rock star commercial where Tim in
Our
IT,
no
you're a
code
rock star.
our no code operators will, will become the rock stars of their company for sure, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, we've even seen it's really inspiring to us, right? Like, we work. You're in London. We work with John Lewis and Partners, right?
Hmm.
And we've worked with them for years. And they came to us originally. It was their events team and their marketing team, right? And they came in and they kind of had a chip on their shoulder because they never really felt they got much respect at the company, and like they didn't get any budget every year, and they were kind of like, finally they had a budget to do something, right? Which was unfortunately the pandemic, but they had a budget to build an online events hub, right? And this was just our MVP before there was any UI or anything, just to prove that you could do this type of data transfer. And they came back to us with feedback where like everyone in the company was excited about it, and they're the really high up people were asking, how did you do it? And like everybody was just like so excited about it, and they've maintained that for years now. We've worked with them for 3 years, and they're still as excited about it today. And it's just really, really awesome to see people thrive because they have the proper tools to do really creative things.
Hmm.
It's why we do
once
this. It's
once
why we
people
get
get
upset.
together once people get together and really start to understanding that yes, tools that work together with APIs with anything is fantastic, you can see all the potential there. But as soon as people start understanding that working with other people can be equally as powerful, I mean, I'm a community person, so I'm a true advocate for that. Collective growth is something that I absolutely believe in. And whenever you realize that there's so many other people out there that are trying to achieve similar results, or they're very happy to share their knowledge on a particular topic, like you today here, that's when things really get to work, to me, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, and I think that particular thing has been really the catalyst for me all these years working on this stuff. Is it's the connection piece, but it's also been the drive to go further, right? Because I think when people come into these tools, they think, oh, okay, well, it's advertised like this, and I've built this thing, and it kind of works, right? And you get a taste of it, and you're like, oh, this is awesome. I want to go further. And then that's where you start to hit these like ceilings, and it's like I can only go so far until something new exists. And that's where I think we're headed, is into this next realm of, can I share my screen real quick? I'll show
Yeah,
you one of
sure,
our
sure. Let me
share
let me
you one
pull it in.
show you one of our customer sites. So this is Publix, which is it's a very, very large grocery store chain in the United States, and they do cooking classes at 11 locations. So with our app, with our platform, they've got 11 Eventbrite accounts synced in. So each account has a CMS page that is updated programmatically, right? So this stuff all stays up to date. So when they import an event, the events are already single referenced, right? And they're also single referenced to the categories, which are coming from Eventbrite. So when you click into demonstrations, these go to the proper page, right? So the person that's creating these, they have thousands of events that they launch every quarter. They just created an Eventbrite, and it shows up on the right page. All of the information comes through. If they change anything about it, it updates automatically. If the event becomes sold out, it updates automatically. So we're listening for all of these changes that aren't even necessarily triggered by a human, right? Because that's one thing to know about APIs. There are things that happen that aren't triggered by a human, right? So, or directly by a human. It could be, hey, this ticket quantity reached 0, so now it is sold out. and then a webhook fires that we listen to actually go ahead and sell the event out. I think they probably have some in here that are, but you can then go ahead and do creative things like update the front end and show when things are sold out versus just having these like static sort of design. So it really starts to merge the worlds of web app and website and app, and it all becomes very, very interesting. You were at the No Code Conf, right, Claudia?
Yep. Yep.
You remember when they announced the dev link for Webflow and
Yes,
everyone
there
was
was
so
a
excited?
massive yes, yes.
So
Um,
so these systems that we're building, we've tried to make them very flexible, right? So what we would hope is this same connection that we're making to the Webflow front end here and into the CMS, you would be able to store that same data into like a MongoDB or Xano or something like that, so that you're getting this really powerful connection, but then you're using DevLink on top of it for some more complex. So it gets really, really cool when you start to think about moving away, because I think there's a future where websites as they exist now are not ever a thing anymore. I think everything will just be a web app.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think that's
possibly.
where Webflow is slowly pushing it, with memberships, and when you add memberships, it becomes an app, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I
And I feel
think,
it's just that feeling of wanting to get one step further. Every time you have a taste, as you were saying, and you see the potential behind the product or wherever it is, or even your own potential, you want to go a step further and see, okay, how far can I get? I want to develop it even more. And so yeah, I think I can see that happening, just having a lot of web apps in the world. But
yeah, and I
before
think
we before we get there, we need to get more people educated in no code. And it's fantastic as a technology because it's empowering so many people right now that up until 1 to 2 years ago only had these ideas and could never, they didn't have the knowledge on how to put it down into a code or the resources to hire a developer to do that. And so now it's we're definitely living in a good time where people can put their ideas into practice. What's your do you want me to share your screen? I can see it in the
yeah, I
background,
have one
so
more slide that goes along with that. So
let's pop
I
it in.
think we're at a point in time where it's a call to arms to everybody that is in these communities and everyone that is working really hard to push the limits, right?
Hmm.
I think there's going to be, I think there are tools that people are familiar with, that they're comfortable with, but I think the innovation's not going to come from them, right? I think it's going to be new tools and new platforms that start to bridge these gaps, because it just requires a much different approach. So I would say to everyone that's out there to, when you see people asking for user testing or to provide product feedback or to sign up for betas, always try to do those things, because it strengthens your connections with each other, strengthens your connection with that platform, and it allows the platforms to become more robust and more representative of the people that are using them. And I think these are the tools that are going to drive us all into the future, not just a handful of really rich people or really large companies. They will benefit as well, but we're going to get a piece of the pie. And I think now is the time to be learning these things. Definitely sign up for Claudia and the No Code Ops API. Give me the exact name.
Yeah.
API
Yeah,
course.
we're launching an API bootcamp. So we teamed up with automation experts at 9x, and we've had these fantastic speakers like you, having this series on based on APIs, which I jokingly call the planet of APIs. But yeah, we teamed up with them to set up this bootcamp because just what we were saying, it's fantastic to getting our hands dirty and start playing with APIs by ourselves. But if you want to really get a step ahead and start building something together, just like what you're saying, join the beta or join communities because there's so many people out there that are going to help you, right? You don't have to do this by yourself. I didn't do it by myself. I don't think anyone did. So don't feel afraid to reach out for help and also invest in your knowledge, because as much as we are here, offering these webinars here every week for free, and they're ever so valuable. If you really want to get real about something that you're building or your own professional development, yeah, make sure you sign up to all the opportunities that you have around you. That's what worked for me, and so I always recommend it to other people.
Yeah. So good to be here finally. And I hope there's still some people out there. If anybody's got
Yeah, there
any
are.
questions, if anybody's got any questions, go for it.
Let's open the Q&A. So anyone in the audience, feel free to drop your questions in the chat now. We have about 10 minutes, and as the questions are coming through, hi Praxis, I'm going to read some of the questions that we had in our form for the people when they signed up. So let's see what we have. Do you see APIs being replaced or just evolving? Kind of like we kind of discussed through the presentation, but yeah,
I
what do you
think
think?
I think what we'll see, and this is probably a pretty short answer, is a lot of there's an API team at all these companies, right? And right now, a lot of the resource gets eaten up by support. So they're not spending, it's either support or building integrations. So what they're not spending time and money on is upkeep and maintenance of their APIs to make them more scalable, more accessible, and more stable. And what I think we'll see is the shift into ecosystems. And what they'll do is, I think, be very similar to what Webflow is doing, which is provide, marketing support for partners that come in, provide an app marketplace for partners to come in, provide a world-class API, actually talk to the engineering community and say, what do you need us to build into this API? Right. So I think it's going to become a much more collaborative space between the software and the user. And I think that a lot more resource will get diverted into stability, which we all benefit from, no matter what
Mm-hmm.
integrations platform you're using.
Cool.
So
We
they're
have a
not going anywhere.
question. No, I don't think they are. I think, as in the question, I think they will change, they will evolve, but they're not going anywhere. We have a nice question from a developer, which I'm always very intrigued. Whenever we have developers in our webinars, it's always very nice
Mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to build that bridge between no code and development. So that's cool. So from William Wade, what is the way forward if you think that the current frameworks are not scalable enough? As a developer, I am curious to hear where you think we should be going. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the frameworks are scalable enough. I just think that the people that get to use it at scale are very few, right? So I think where we're going is more accessible, scalable tools, right? So the pieces that are there are technically fine, right? The Eventbrite API is a great example. It's 10 years old, and we're using it to do this very modern process at scale, right? But the pieces that sit in between the APIs are where the innovation is going to come from. It's I think that the APIs on both ends will become better and they'll become more well maintained. But those pieces in the middle are really what are going to bridge the gap for, we'll say, 95% of use cases, right? There's always going to be edge cases and there's always going to be a need for engineers and there's always going to be stuff that goes further. But we should be able to hit most of those use cases with something really reusable, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, even in a somewhat small sample set of 20 enterprise customers, we went with this theory of, hey, we're going to present a limited amount of fields and see if people ask for other stuff, right? Nobody ever asked for anything else. Once you've solved the problem, you've solved it, and then you make it reusable for everybody. So that way, everyone's not spending all of their time rebuilding the same thing over and over and over and over and over, and everybody's trying to build the same connector. It's a waste of human resource, right? So that is where I think the innovation comes at.
Awesome. We have one more question. Do you think we should move into a common standard on how to build them? How do you think AI will come in when scaling and upgrading outdated APIs really easy?
Um, See, I mean, it's interesting because API technically is supposed to be a common language, right? And there are common, and our CTO, Nathan, who I hope is watching because he's a genius with this stuff. He's the one that's
Hi,
making all
Nathan.
the magic happen in the background. And our chief growth officer, Gabe, who's one of our co-founders, he's really thinking about how this fits into everyone's business, not just ours, right? So that everyone can benefit from these things. Um, I think that there are multiple languages for these things, right? And some of these languages are better for different types of applications. And I think that that's fine. And I think that will always be the case. I think, again, what will become it's currently that can be a barrier, right? Because if you've got two different systems that have two different languages, you have to somehow translate it, or there are little things that have to happen to move the data, right? And with systems like ours, that all happens in the background. So as far as you're concerned, you don't even have to care if it was built in JavaScript and Go or whatever the languages that the software company decided to use. It falls on a third party expert to make that translation so that the systems communicate with each other effectively. Because you could have an old system that's 15 years old, or you could have a new system that's 3 years old and just a new API, and they're using vastly different technology. You need to make them work, and that's a kind of a challenge for people, right? Because there's rate limits and there's all of these limits and rules that people put into these APIs that the average user may not understand how to manipulate or work with, that we also handle in the background in systemized approaches. So I think that no, they won't become fully universal, although they claim to be universal now. Um, so that'll just always be a challenge,
I think
based
the
on
more visual they get, the better. We should really push at creating more visual interfaces, especially for people like me. I love something visual, and I think it could be the common language. Everyone can. It's intuitive, so
that's something that I want to show you this at some point another day, but something we're experimenting with is I showed you that list of fields that you can use, right?
yeah.
Generally in a platform, the API field corresponds to some part of their interface, right?
Hmm.
So what we're toying with is like taking screenshots of what the field corresponds to in the platform and displaying it next to it. So like event image, you would know where to add the event image in the platform. So we're
Yeah.
kind of like working through some things like that can make it more visual, because it is data. It's hard to wrap your head around something you can't see and it's moving and I don't know what it means.
Yeah,
That
I
kind
don't
of
know.
stuff.
I don't know what I'm changing necessarily. I think it's really that would be really important. Like we had a conversation with Stanley about documentation here on APIs, and one of the questions that we get asked the most is like, how do we make sure the APIs are really universal, like or accessible to everyone? Most of the documentation is written in English and is not written in any other language, and so how do we facilitate that? I think like being more visual, obviously translating your documentation into as many languages as you can, that could be helpful. But yeah.
Yeah, I think we see ourselves as the interpreters, right?
Hmm.
Where our hope would be that anyone that's using our tools never has to go look at the documentation anyways. So what we should be doing is pulling the relevant information from a technical document, translating it based on our knowledge into something that people can easily use, right? And that would be my hope. Like, yeah, it's good to know how these things work and what these systems are, but at the end of the day, we just want to get our work done, and we want to achieve our goal, which for the most part the goal isn't to build an integration. It's to have whatever the integration does work.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
100%. It does. It does. 100%. Well, Jason, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was such an honor to have you kind of wrapping up all our series of APIs. It's been a fantastic journey. So yeah, I'm very, very happy that you were here kind of for the end of it. And I know that next week we're just going to have a roundtable with all the speakers that we had so far. So yourself, Stanley, Rachel, Guy, Chris, and that is all, I think. So we're gonna have you all here, and so that our audience could just interact with you, or we could just have a final 30 minutes chat about APIs and see, yeah, maybe if we can collaborate together in the future, that would be really great. Um,
Yeah.
Amazing.
And I just shared a link with you if there's some way that we can put that into the messages that we have
Sure.
a partners page on our website. So anybody that wants to get early access to the software, um, you know, give us a shout. We'll get you on the list for the V2 of the platform, and we'd love to get feedback and questions and ideas. And it would be great to hear from you and get you in and using it. So
Building
thank you,
public.
everybody, for being here. Thank you to Claudia for everything that you do for everyone. I know it's a lot of work, and a lot of people are very grateful for what you do, including myself. So thank you
It's
so
all
much.
good. It's all good fun. As long as I do it with great people like you, I'm happy. So thank you so much, Jason. And yeah, I'll see you next week. And goodbye, everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Bye bye.